This is a real woman. She died over 100 years ago, and her body slowly turned into a bar of soap. And right now, today, you can walk into a museum and stand inches from her. That's not a horror movie. That's not AI. It's real. And it's not even close to the most disturbing thing hidden behind museum glass. Because in those same buildings sit a child frozen the moment she was sacrificed. A skull with a 3-foot iron rod blasted clean through it, and a giant skeleton stolen against his dying wish. I found the 111 most horrifying real things hidden inside the world's museums, and I ranked everyone. Number 11 will stay with you long after this video ends. Let's count down. 1. There is a lady in Philadelphia who literally turned into a bar of soap after she died. Back in the 1800s, this woman got buried in soil so strange that her body chemically transformed into a greasy, waxy soap substance instead of rotting normally. Scientists were absolutely stunned. The museum dug her up, popped her behind glass, and now thousands of tourists stand there staring at the only human being you could theoretically use to wash your hands. 2. Imagine getting murdered 5,000 years ago and your killer still gets caught. The Iceman was strolling through the Alps when somebody shot him in the shoulder with an arrow and left him to freeze. The ice preserved him perfectly for over 53 centuries. When hikers found him in 1991, they assumed he was just a lost camper. Nope. He is humanity's oldest cold case, complete with the murder weapon still jammed inside his body for detectives to admire. 3. There is a tiny pistol in Washington that changed American history in about 2 seconds. On the night of April 14th, 1865, actor John Wilkes Booth crept into Ford's Theater and used this little .44 Derringer to shoot President Lincoln in the back of the head. The thing barely holds one bullet. Booth gambled everything on a single shot and somehow pulled it off. Today, that ridiculous little gun sits quietly in a case, the smallest object that ever caused the biggest disaster. 4. Picture a chunk of rock that taught the entire world how to read ancient Egyptian. For over 1,000 years, nobody on Earth could understand hieroglyphs. Then, soldiers in Egypt stumbled across the Rosetta Stone, which had the same message carved in 3 different scripts. Scholars went absolutely feral trying to crack it. One Frenchman, named Champollion, basically devoted his whole life to it and reportedly fainted from excitement when he finally solved the puzzle. One rock unlocked a dead language. 5. A man once had a 3-foot iron rod blast straight through his skull and just casually walked it off. In 1848, railroad worker Phineas Gage was packing explosives when the rod shot up through his cheek and out the top of his head, taking a chunk of brain with it. He stayed conscious. He even talked to the doctor. He survived for years afterward, though his personality changed completely. His skull and that infamous rod now sit together at Harvard, reunited forever. 6. There is a dead pharaoh's golden face that is somehow more famous than most living celebrities. When archaeologists opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, they found a solid gold death mask resting over the mummy's face, weighing about 24 pounds. The boy king died around age 19, and nobody remembered him for thousands of years. Then, this dazzling mask turned him into the most famous Egyptian who ever lived. People lined up for decades just to gawk at a teenager's shiny funeral helmet. 7. In 1869, a giant stone man was dug up on a farm, and all of America completely lost its mind. Workers in upstate New York found a 10-foot petrified human, and crowds paid good money to gawk at this prehistoric titan. It was total nonsense. A scheming tobacco guy had carved it from gypsum and buried it himself as a prank. Even after it was exposed as a fake, people still paid to see it because Americans simply adore a confident liar. 8. There is a dinosaur in Chicago so famous she has her own Twitter account, and a serious attitude. Sue is the largest, most complete Tyrannosaurus Rex ever discovered, named after the fossil hunter who found her in South Dakota. The skeleton is so valuable that an auction war erupted, and a museum paid over $8 million to win her. Now, Sue towers over visitors with 40-something terrifying teeth, glaring down at tiny humans who suddenly feel very grateful she went extinct. 9. Some poor man got hanged 2,000 years ago, and his face came out looking weirdly peaceful. Tolland Man is an Iron Age bog body found in Denmark, so perfectly preserved by the swamp that researchers first thought he was a recent murder victim and called the police. He still has the noose snug around his neck. His expression is calm, almost like he is enjoying a nice nap, which is genuinely unsettling for a guy who was clearly executed and dumped in a bog. 10. There is a skeleton that slowly turned into a human statue while the man was still alive. Harry Eastlack had a rare condition where his body transformed its own muscles into solid bone, gradually locking him into place like a creaky, rusty robot. By the time he died, he could barely move his lips. Before passing, he donated his skeleton to science so doctors could study the disease. Now he stands frozen in Philadelphia, teaching researchers about the cruelest case of accidental petrification ever recorded. 11. Someone fished a 2,000-year-old computer out of the sea, and nobody believed it for decades. Divers near the Greek island of Antikythera found a corroded lump of bronze gears that turned out to be an ancient calculating machine for tracking the stars and predicting eclipses. The Greeks built it. Then humanity forgot how to make anything like it for over 1,000 years. Scientists studied it for ages before admitting that yes, the ancients basically invented a clockwork laptop and then lost the receipt. 12. There is a bullet-riddled car that took over 100 bullets and became a tourist attraction. In 1934, the infamous outlaws Bonnie and Clyde were cruising through Louisiana when lawmen ambushed their stolen Ford and unloaded everything they had into it. The couple never had a chance. The car looks like Swiss cheese with wheels. Today it sits in a Nevada casino, still wearing its 100-plus bullet holes, proving that crime does not pay, but it does make for excellent gift shop photos. 13. A philosopher in London left instructions to keep his own dressed-up skeleton on display forever, and the university actually did it. Jeremy Bentham hated wasting things, so he asked that his body be preserved, clothed, and seated upright as an auto icon. His real skeleton sits there in his actual clothes, topped with a wax head because the real preserved one came out looking horrifying. Legend says he still gets wheeled into certain university meetings, technically present and definitely not voting. 14. There is a gorgeous blue diamond that supposedly curses everyone who owns it, and people kept buying it anyway. The Hope Diamond is a deep blue gem the size of a walnut, and its long list of former owners reportedly suffered bankruptcies, scandals, and grisly deaths. A famous jeweler eventually donated it to the Smithsonian, mailing it through the regular post office in a brown paper package. The mailman who delivered cursed jewelry later claimed his own string of misfortunes, naturally blaming the rock. 15. High in the Andes, archaeologists found 3 children frozen so perfectly they look like they fell asleep yesterday. The Inca sacrificed them on a mountaintop over 500 years ago, and the brutal cold preserved everything, even tiny strands of hair and the contents of their stomachs. One girl still has braids and rosy cheeks. Researchers were so unnerved by how alive they appear that the display is kept dim and respectful, because staring at perfectly preserved sleeping kids understandably gives everyone the chills. 16. One doctor spent his career pulling random objects out of people's throats and saved every single one of them. Dr. Chevalier Jackson retrieved around 2,000 things that folks had swallowed or inhaled, including coins, toys, pins, and a tiny padlock. He carefully labeled each item and stored them in little drawers. The collection is basically a museum of human carelessness. It is a powerful reminder to chew your food, because somewhere in Philadelphia sits the exact toy that nearly ended somebody's afternoon. 17. An English digger struck gold in a grassy mound and accidentally uncovered an entire buried ship. At Sutton Hoo, beneath an ordinary-looking field, lay an Anglo-Saxon king's funeral ship loaded with treasure, including a magnificent iron helmet with a haunting face mask. The wooden ship had rotted into a ghostly imprint in the soil. The helmet became the iconic face of an entire era, and the whole discovery rewrote what historians thought about supposedly unsophisticated medieval Britain. 18. There is a tiny mummified girl whose eyes seem to slowly open and close, terrifying everyone who visits. Rosalia Lombardo died as a toddler in 1920, and a doctor preserved her so flawlessly that she earned the nickname Sleeping Beauty. Visitors in the Palermo catacombs swore they watched her eyelids flutter. Scientists later explained it as a trick of changing light through the glass, But try telling that to anyone standing alone in a candlelit crypt full of staring child mummies. 19. Almost 4,000 years ago, a king carved his laws into a giant stone pillar, so nobody could claim they did not know the rules. The Code of Hammurabi lists hundreds of laws, including the famous eye for an eye principle, topped with a carving of the king receiving authority from a god. It is brutally specific, covering everything from broken bones to bad beer. Ancient Babylonians basically got the world's first terms and conditions, and unlike us, they actually had to read them. 20. A grieving mother insisted the entire nation look at what hatred did to her son, and that decision helped change America forever. In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy, was brutally murdered, and his mother chose an open casket so the world could see the truth. That single act of courage stunned the country and helped ignite the civil rights movement. The original glass-topped casket is now preserved in the Smithsonian, standing as a solemn witness that history must never forget. 21. There is a book that has baffled every genius on Earth because nobody can read a single word of it. The Voynich manuscript is filled with bizarre plants, strange star charts, and an unknown alphabet that no language expert, codebreaker, or computer has ever cracked. People have spent entire careers convinced they were close. They were not. It might be a secret code, an elaborate hoax, or pure gibberish, but for now it remains the ultimate locked diary with no key. 22. In Philadelphia, there is a 9-foot stretch of human colon that once belonged to a man whose insides simply refused to cooperate. He had a condition that prevented his bowels from working properly, so everything just kept building up until his colon ballooned to a horrifying size. He reportedly made a living showing off his enormous belly at sideshows. After he died, the monstrous organ was preserved, and today it remains the single most disturbing thing visitors are weirdly desperate to see. 23. There is a 3,000-year-old queen's face so beautiful that an entire country wants her back. The painted bust of Nefertiti shows an Egyptian queen with a perfectly balanced face, looking like she could model for a magazine tomorrow. A German team dug her up and quietly carried her off to Berlin. Egypt has been politely and not so politely demanding her return ever since. She sits serenely in a glass case, completely unbothered by the ongoing international custody battle. 24. There is an electric chair in Texas that ended the lives of 361 people and somehow earned a cozy nickname. Folks called it Old Sparky, which is a disturbingly cheerful name for a machine built to execute prisoners. It served the state for decades before being retired. Now it sits in a prison museum where visitors can stand uncomfortably close to it. Nobody is allowed to sit in it, which is a rule that genuinely should not need stating. 25. A Chinese emperor was so afraid of dying that he built an entire clay army to protect him in the afterlife. Qin Shi Huang ordered thousands of life-size terracotta soldiers, each with a unique face, buried near his tomb to guard him forever. Farmers digging a well in 1974 accidentally cracked into this silent underground battalion. The emperor obsessed over immortality his whole life, ironically poisoning himself with supposed life-extending potions, then settling for a pottery army instead. 26. One doctor collected over 100 human skulls and labeled each one with exactly how that person died. The Hurdle Skull Collection features 139 skulls, each tagged with details like the person's job, age, and cause of death, ranging from suicide to disease to a sailor who fell from a ship. It was originally meant to disprove racist pseudoscience about skull shapes. Today, the wall of grinning labeled skulls is both educational and the stuff of pure nightmare fuel. 27. A shepherd chasing a lost goat accidentally found ancient scrolls hidden in a desert cave for 2,000 years. The Dead Sea Scrolls are some of the oldest biblical texts ever discovered, stuffed into clay jars and forgotten until that lucky teenager threw a rock into a cave and heard pottery shatter. Scholars went absolutely wild. The fragile scrolls are now kept in a specially designed shrine in Jerusalem, carefully protected from light, air, and overly excited tourists with grabby hands. 28. There is a dead revolutionary leader in Moscow who has been getting fresh makeovers for 100 years. When Lenin died in 1924, his body was preserved and put on public display, and a dedicated team has re-embalmed him regularly ever since to keep him looking presentable. They reportedly bathe him in special chemicals and even fix his suit. He has technically been dead for a century, but receives better skincare than most living humans could ever dream of affording. 29. There is a literal slice of Albert Einstein's brain, sitting on a glass slide for anyone to admire. After the genius died in 1955, the doctor performing the autopsy quietly kept his brain without proper permission, then sliced it into hundreds of pieces for study. He stored chunks in jars in his basement for decades. Scientists hoped to find the secret of genius hiding in the tissue. A few thin slices ended up in Philadelphia, where you can stare at brilliance itself. 30. Ancient people in Germany carved the night sky onto a bronze disc thousands of years before telescopes existed. The Nebra sky disk shows the sun, moon, and a cluster of stars, making it the oldest known map of the heavens. Treasure hunters dug it up illegally and tried to sell it on the black market before police staged a sting operation to recover it. Now this gorgeous green and gold disc proves our ancestors were stargazing long before anyone invented homework. 31. The people of Pompeii were frozen in their final terrified moment, and we can still see them today. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, it buried the city in ash so fast that residents were entombed exactly where they fell. Their bodies decayed, leaving hollow spaces, and clever scientists poured plaster inside to capture their shapes. The result is haunting casts of people shielding their faces, hugging loved ones, and curling up, forever trapped in the worst afternoon ancient Italy ever had. 32. George Washington did not have wooden teeth, but the truth is honestly somehow worse. The first American president wore dentures made from a grim mix of materials, including ivory, metal, animal teeth, and real human teeth likely pulled from enslaved people. His mouth was a constant source of pain his entire life. These clunky, uncomfortable choppers are now displayed at his estate, reminding everyone that founding a country is impressive but apparently does absolutely nothing for your dental insurance. 33. There is a giant medieval book so terrifying it earned the nickname the Devil's Bible. The Codex Gigas is enormous, taking a fully grown man 2 hands just to lift it. And inside sits a full-page portrait of Satan himself staring right back at you. Legend claims a desperate monk facing execution made a deal with the devil to finish the entire book in one single night. The handwriting is suspiciously consistent throughout, which honestly only makes the creepy story better. 34. A Chinese noblewoman died over 2,000 years ago, and her body is still soft and squishy, which is deeply unnatural. Lady Di was discovered so perfectly preserved that her skin remained moist, her limbs still bent, and her hair stayed in place. Researchers even found her last meal still inside her stomach, which turned out to be melon. Scientists remain baffled by how the ancient burial achieved this. She is basically the best preserved corpse in history, and frankly, nobody asked for that. 35. A massive warship sank embarrassingly fast on its very first voyage, then got pulled out of the sea 3 centuries later mostly intact. The Vasa was a Swedish royal warship so top-heavy and badly designed that it tipped over and sank within minutes of leaving the harbor in 1628, in front of a horrified crowd. The cold Baltic water preserved the wooden ship beautifully. Now it stands fully reassembled in Stockholm, a glorious monument to spending a fortune on a complete flop. 36. There was a real woman in France who grew a 10-inch horn straight out of her forehead like a confused unicorn. Madame Dimanche developed a massive curling growth that doctors eventually managed to remove, saving her life. A wax model captures exactly how she looked, horn proudly extending from her face. Visitors are equal parts horrified and fascinated. It is a strange reminder that the human body can occasionally decide to do something absolutely bizarre with zero warning whatsoever. 37. There is a spear that supposedly pierced Jesus, and powerful men have spent centuries obsessing over owning it. The Holy Lance, also called the Spear of Destiny, is said to grant unstoppable power to whoever holds it. Conquerors and emperors coveted it for ages, and even Hitler reportedly became fixated on the legend. The spear sits today in Vienna, though historians note it cannot possibly be old enough to be the real one. The myth, however, refuses to ever die. 38. The actual paperwork that condemned innocent people during the Salem witch trials still exists, signed and terrifying. In 1692, mass hysteria swept through Massachusetts as neighbors accused each other of witchcraft, and the court documents recorded every wild accusation and death sentence. People were hanged based on dreams, grudges, and pure panic. The yellowed original papers survive in Salem, preserving the names of the accusers and the doomed, proving that sometimes the scariest monster in town is just gossip. 39. There is a giant embroidered cloth longer than a football field that tells the story of a medieval invasion like an ancient comic strip. The Bayeux Tapestry stretches over 230 feet, depicting the Norman conquest of England in 1066, complete with battles, ships, and even a famous comet. Medieval needleworkers stitched the whole thing by hand. It even includes a scene many believe shows a king getting an arrow to the eye, which was a truly terrible day at work. 40. A celebrated brain surgeon collected around 500 human brains in jars and kept them tucked away for decades. Dr. Harvey Cushing studied these brains to advance neurosurgery, carefully storing each one along with patient photos and notes. After he died, the entire collection was nearly forgotten, stashed in a dusty basement at Yale. Students reportedly snuck down there for spooky late-night visits. Today, the brains are displayed properly, a quiet, glowing room full of the organs that once held entire lives. 41. There is a painting so famous that people travel across the world just to be mildly disappointed by how small it is. The Mona Lisa hangs in Paris behind thick, bulletproof glass, smiling her mysterious little smirk at massive crowds. She became a global superstar partly because she was stolen in 1911, and the empty wall where she once hung drew even bigger crowds than the painting. When she returned, she was officially the most famous face in all of art history. 42. In a Mexican town, families who could not pay a grave tax got a horrifying surprise because their dead relatives were dug right back up. The Guanajuato mummies were exhumed when burial fees went unpaid, and the dry local conditions had naturally preserved the bodies into leathery, twisted figures with shocked expressions. Instead of reburying them, the town put them on display for paying tourists. It is a grim lesson that in some places, even death comes with an overdue bill. 43. A president got shot, survived the bullet, then was slowly killed by his own doctors poking around with dirty fingers. After James Garfield was shot in 1881, the wound was not actually fatal, but physicians kept probing for the bullet with unwashed hands, causing massive infection. He suffered for months before finally dying. His shattered spine is preserved, showing the bullet's path. The tragic truth is that the assassin started the job, but unwashed 19th century medicine sadly finished it. 44. Tiny medieval chess pieces carved from walrus tusks were found buried on a Scottish beach, and they all look completely fed up with life. The Lewis chessmen feature grumpy little kings, worried queens holding their faces, and warriors literally biting their own shields in frustration. Nobody knows exactly how they ended up hidden in the sand. They sat forgotten for centuries before being discovered. Today, these brooding ivory figures are beloved, precisely because they look like they are having the worst day ever. 45. Someone caught Thomas Edison's actual final breath in a glass tube, and you can go look at it. As the famous inventor lay dying in 1931, his son reportedly sealed several test tubes of air from the room. Edison's friend Henry Ford, who idolized him, ended up with one of these breath-filled tubes. Ford kept it like a sacred relic. Now this innocent-looking test tube sits in a Michigan museum, technically containing the last gasp of the man who lit up the world. 46. The Aztecs carved a 24-ton calendar into solid stone, and it is genuinely terrifying to look at. The Aztec sunstone features a fierce face in the center, surrounded by symbols representing days, ages, and cosmic destruction. It was buried for centuries before being rediscovered beneath a city square in Mexico City. Some believe the central face is a hungry deity demanding sacrifices. Either way, it is the most metal calendar ever made, and it never once told anyone the weekend. 47. People once paid good money to see a hideous mermaid that was actually a monkey sewn onto a fish. The Fiji mermaid was a grotesque little creation, the kind showman P.T. Barnum gleefully exhibited as a genuine sea maiden to gawking crowds. It had a monkey's wrinkled torso stitched to a dried fishtail, looking nothing like the beautiful mermaids people imagined. Yet audiences lined up anyway, proving once again that Americans will happily pay to be confidently and entertainingly lied to. 48. We found the bones of one of humanity's oldest grandmothers, and scientists named her after a Beatles song. Lucy is a 3.2 million-year-old human ancestor whose skeleton revealed that our early relatives walked upright long before developing big brains. The team that found her in Ethiopia celebrated by blasting a famous Beatles tune all night, which inspired her nickname. She is so precious that the real bones stay locked away while a cast greets the public instead. 49. There is a piece of brick from the wall where one of history's bloodiest mob hits went down. During the 1929 St. Valentine's Day massacre in Chicago, gangsters disguised as police lined up rival mobsters and gunned them down against a garage wall. The bullet-scarred bricks were later saved, and chunks now sit in a Las Vegas museum. A man even reportedly bought the whole wall, only to find that owning a notorious murder backdrop brought him absolutely no good luck. 50. The Babylonians built a glowing blue gate so stunning it still leaves people speechless thousands of years later. The Ishtar Gate was covered in deep blue glazed bricks, decorated with golden dragons and bulls, serving as the grand entrance to ancient Babylon. German archaeologists carefully shipped the pieces home and rebuilt the whole towering gate inside a Berlin museum. Walking through it feels like stepping into a legend, and it makes every modern city entrance look embarrassingly plain by comparison. 51. Two brothers were joined at the body their entire lives, became wealthy American celebrities, and even shared one liver after death. Chong and Eng Bunker were the original conjoined twins who gave us the term Siamese twins, connected by a band of flesh at the chest. They married two sisters, fathered 21 children combined, and ran a successful farm. After they died, doctors preserved their shared liver and made a cast of their connection, forever proving these two genuinely did everything together. 52. The oldest photograph ever taken required the photographer to sit perfectly still for around 8 excruciating hours. Frenchman Joseph Niepce captured a blurry view from his window in the 1820s, creating the first permanent photo in history. The exposure took so long that the sun appears to light both sides of the buildings. The grainy image looks like a smudge to modern eyes, but it launched the entire art of photography. Now it sits in Texas, the great-great-grandparent of every selfie. 53. The airplane that dropped the first atomic bomb on a city is parked in a museum where visitors walk right past it. The Enola Gay was the B-29 bomber that released the bomb over Hiroshima in 1945, named by the pilot after his own mother. The plane looks deceptively ordinary, just polished silver metal and propellers. Yet it carried one of the most devastating weapons in human history. Standing beside it, people often fall completely silent, unsure of what to even feel. 54. A man from over 5,000 years ago dried out in the desert sand so well that he still has his hair and got nicknamed Ginger. This ancient Egyptian, known as Gebeline Man, was naturally mummified by the hot sand long before fancy embalming was invented. His reddish hair survived, along with his skin and even his curled-up sleeping position. Scans later revealed he was actually stabbed in the back, making this peaceful-looking sand nap secretly another ancient murder mystery. 55. A sitting American president had a secret tumor cut out of his jaw on a moving yacht, so the public would never find out. In 1893, Grover Cleveland felt a growth in his mouth during a financial crisis, and fearing panic, he had surgeons operate on him aboard a boat under total secrecy. They removed part of his jaw and replaced it with rubber. The press had no idea for years. A piece of that secret tumor is still preserved in Philadelphia. 56. Someone carved a curvy little statue 30,000 years ago, making it older than basically every civilization combined. The Venus of Willendorf is a small limestone figurine of a full-bodied woman, discovered in Austria and dated to the Stone Age. Nobody knows if she was a goddess, a fertility charm, or simply ancient art. She fits right in the palm of your hand, She has outlasted empires, ice ages, and entire languages, while modern phones barely survive 2 years. 57. A museum in England keeps a collection of actual shrunken human heads, and the tradition behind them is as wild as it sounds. Certain Amazonian peoples once shrank the heads of enemies through an elaborate process, producing fist-sized faces with stitched lips. The Pitt Rivers Museum displayed these sansa for decades, drawing fascinated crowds. In recent years, the museum quietly removed them from view out of respect, though the unsettling little heads remain carefully stored somewhere safely behind closed doors. 58. The spacecraft that carried the first humans to the moon is scorched, dented, and parked where everyone can admire it. The Apollo 11 command module Columbia brought the astronauts safely home in 1969, surviving a fiery plunge through the atmosphere that left its surface charred. It looks surprisingly small and cramped for such a legendary mission. 3 grown men squeezed inside that cone for days. Now it sits in Washington, quietly reminding everyone that humanity once parked a car on the moon. 59. A Civil War general had his leg blown off by a cannonball, then casually visited the amputated limb in a museum for years afterward. General Daniel Sickles lost his leg in the Battle of Gettysburg, and instead of burying it, donated the shattered bones to a medical museum. He reportedly stopped by to visit his own leg on the anniversary of the injury. It is honestly the strangest long-term relationship in history, a man and the leg he refused to let go. 60. Archaeologists found a gleaming golden death mask and immediately announced they had gazed upon the face of a legendary king. The Mask of Agamemnon is a haunting gold funeral mask discovered in the ancient ruins of Mycenae, with closed eyes and a serene expression. The excited discoverer claimed it belonged to the famous warrior king from Greek legend. Later research suggested it was actually centuries too old to be him. Still, the golden face remains one of archaeology's most beautiful celebrity mix-ups. 61. There is a simple lunch counter that became one of the bravest battlegrounds in American history. In 1964, black college students sat down at a segregated Woolworth's counter in Greensboro and politely refused to leave when denied service. They returned day after day, facing insults and abuse with quiet courage. Their peaceful protests spread across the country and helped break segregation. A section of that very counter now sits in the Smithsonian, a humble symbol of enormous world-changing bravery. 62. There is a fossil that proved dinosaurs and birds are basically the same family, and it stunned scientists everywhere. The Berlin Archaeopteryx is an ancient creature with both reptile teeth and clear feathered wings, captured perfectly in stone. It appeared just after Darwin published his theory of evolution, arriving like a feathery exclamation point at the ideal moment. Critics who doubted evolution suddenly had a winged dinosaur staring them down. Today, it remains one of the most important fossils ever discovered. 63. A famous wax museum got its start by molding the faces of people freshly executed by guillotine. Madame Tussaud learned wax sculpting and was later forced to make death masks of victims during the French Revolution, pressing wax onto the severed heads of the recently beheaded. She kept these grim molds and built a sensational exhibition from them. Her wax empire eventually became a worldwide attraction. Few tourists snapping selfies there realized the whole thing began with a basket of fresh heads. 64. A giant stone statue was hauled off a remote Pacific island and shipped halfway around the world, and the islanders want him home. The Moai named Hoa Hakananaya once stood on Easter Island, carved by the Rapa Nui people to honor their ancestors. British sailors took him in 1868 and gave him to their queen. Now he stands in London while his island descendants respectfully ask for his return. His stoic stone face reveals nothing about how he feels about the move. 65. A baby woolly mammoth stayed almost perfectly intact in the frozen ground for around 40,000 years before a reindeer herder stumbled upon her. Named Lyuba, she still has her skin, trunk, and tiny ears, looking less like a fossil and more like she is simply taking a very long nap. She likely died after getting stuck in mud as a calf. Scientists were thrilled to study such a complete Ice Age baby, the most adorable frozen surprise the tundra ever delivered. 66. Scientists once celebrated finding the missing link between apes and humans, only to learn somebody had glued it together as a hoax. The Piltdown Man was supposedly an ancient skull discovered in England, hailed for decades as a major evolutionary breakthrough. It turned out to be a human skull combined with an orangutan jaw, stained to look old. The prankster was never definitively identified. The embarrassing fake fooled the entire scientific community for 40 long years before finally being exposed. 67. People in the old days posed their dead relatives for photographs to make them look alive, and the results are deeply unsettling. Since early photos were expensive and rare, families sometimes took one final portrait of a deceased loved one, propping them up, dressing them nicely, and even painting eyes onto their closed lids. Children were posed with toys. The living family members often look blurry while the dead person stays perfectly still. These memorial photos are equal parts touching and absolutely chilling. 68. There is a famous armless statue that became more iconic precisely because she is missing her arms. The Venus de Milo is an ancient Greek sculpture of a goddess, discovered on an island by a farmer who literally dug her out of the ground. Her arms were already long gone, and scholars still argue about what she was originally doing. Was she holding an apple, a mirror, or a spear? Nobody knows, and somehow that mystery only made her even more beloved. 69. The actual mummified body of one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs still has hair on his head after more than 3,000 years. Ramesses II ruled for an incredibly long time, built enormous monuments, and fathered an absurd number of children. His preserved body reveals a tall man with a hooked nose and reddish hair. He even got issued a modern Egyptian passport once, listing his occupation as king, so his ancient corpse could legally fly to France for special preservation treatment. 70. An entire cabin where enslaved people once lived was carefully lifted from a plantation and rebuilt inside a museum, so the truth could never be hidden. This humble wooden structure from South Carolina housed families who endured unimaginable hardship while being forced to labor for others. Rather than let it rot away and be forgotten, preservers moved it piece by piece into the Smithsonian. Standing inside it, visitors feel the weight of history pressing down, raw and impossible to look away from. 71. There is a carpet so old it makes your grandmother's rug look brand new, and it survived by being frozen for thousands of years. The Pazyryk carpet is the world's oldest surviving knotted rug, around 2,400 years old, discovered in a frozen tomb in the mountains. Grave robbers had looted the tomb, accidentally letting water in that froze and preserved the carpet perfectly. Its intricate design features horses and deer, proving ancient weavers had taste far better than ours. 72. There is a museum that proudly displays a famous scientist's actual severed middle finger pointed permanently toward the heavens. Galileo, who dared to claim Earth orbits the sun, had several body parts removed long after his death by admirers treating him like a saint. His preserved middle finger now stands upright inside a glass egg in Florence. The gesture feels weirdly appropriate, as if the persecuted genius is offering one last cheeky reply to everyone who ever doubted his discoveries. 73. A man dug up a field in England and accidentally unearthed the largest pile of ancient gold ever found in the country. The Staffordshire hoard contains thousands of glittering Anglo-Saxon gold and silver pieces, mostly war gear stripped from weapons and armor. The lucky metal detector hobbyist could not believe his eyes as treasure kept appearing. Experts were stunned by both the amount and craftsmanship. It was a literal buried fortune, waiting patiently underground for over 1,000 quiet years. 74. People believed a mysterious crystal skull was a sacred ancient Aztec artifact, until experts proved it was made with modern tools. The eerie clear skull was rumored to hold supernatural powers and even inspired wild legends in movies. Scientists eventually examined the surface and found tiny marks from 19th century carving machines, far too modern for the Aztecs. The skull was a clever fake all along. It now quietly sits in storage, stripped of its magic, but not its weirdly creepy charm. 75. There is a gigantic blue whale skeleton hanging from the ceiling of a famous London museum, greeting everyone who walks in. Nicknamed Hope, This massive skeleton stretches longer than a bus and hangs in a dramatic diving pose above the grand entrance hall. The whale died after stranding on a beach over a century ago. The museum chose her as a symbol of conservation and survival. Visitors crane their necks upward, instantly humbled by the sheer size of the largest animal ever. 76. There is a plain-looking computer in London that quietly gave birth to the entire internet as we know it. On this single black Next machine, a scientist named Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web in 1989, inventing the very first website and the system of links we click every day. He even stuck a handwritten note on it begging people not to switch it off. That unassuming box launched a digital revolution that completely reshaped how all of humanity lives. 77. The Sumerians built a beautiful little box thousands of years ago that shows war on one side and peace on the other. The Standard of Ur is around 4,500 years old and decorated with tiny inlaid scenes of soldiers, prisoners, feasts, and animals. Nobody actually knows what it was used for, hence the vague nickname. It was found in a royal tomb surrounded by sacrificed attendants. Basically, it is the oldest pictorial story of humanity being both fancy and brutal. 78. The actual flag that inspired the American national anthem survives today, a little worn but still proudly enormous. During the War of 1812, this giant star-spangled banner flew over a fort under heavy British bombardment, and seeing it still standing at dawn moved Francis Scott Key to write the famous song. The flag was so big it required 11 women to sew. Over the years, souvenir hunters snipped off pieces, but the cherished banner now rests safely in the Smithsonian. 79. A giant of a man begged not to be put on display after death, and people ignored his final wish for over 2 centuries. Charles Byrne, known as the Irish Giant, stood around 7 feet 7 inches tall and dreaded the idea of his body being studied. He arranged to be buried at sea. A determined collector bribed his way to the corpse anyway, and Byrne's skeleton was exhibited for ages, finally removed from public view only in recent, more respectful years. 80. There is a famous suit of royal armor remembered mostly for one enormous and rather boastful metal feature. King Henry VIII owned a magnificent set of armor that included an absurdly large protruding codpiece, basically a shining metal exaggeration of his manhood. Visitors over the centuries have giggled at it and even rubbed it for luck. The king clearly wanted to project power and virility. Today it remains the most accidentally hilarious piece of armor a serious monarch ever commissioned. 81. There is a chapel in Rome, decorated entirely with the bones of thousands of dead monks, arranged like grim interior design. The Capuchin crypt features the skeletal remains of around 3,700 friars, with skulls, ribs, and pelvises artfully mounted into ceilings, arches, and even chandeliers. A chilling sign reminds visitors that they too will one day join the decor. The monks intended it as a peaceful meditation on mortality, though most modern tourists mainly feel an intense urge to leave. 82. The first airplane that ever truly flew stayed airborne for only 12 seconds, yet it changed the entire world. The Wright Flyer lifted off in 1903 when 2 bicycle-making brothers from Ohio proved that powered human flight was actually possible. The historic first hop covered a distance shorter than a modern jumbo jet's wingspan. Skeptics had insisted flying was impossible. Now their fragile wood and fabric contraption hangs in Washington, the humble ancestor of every plane that ever soared. 83. There is a violin that played soothing music as one of history's most famous ships slipped beneath the freezing ocean. The bandmaster Wallace Hartley reportedly led his musicians in calming melodies as the Titanic sank in 1912, hoping to ease the panic. According to legend, the band played until the very end. His water-damaged violin was later recovered, still strapped to his body in its case. It eventually sold for a fortune, the most haunting instrument that ever survived a disaster. 84. Egypt recorded its very first unification on a carved stone tablet over 5,000 years ago, basically the country's birth certificate. The Narmer palette shows a powerful king wearing crowns and smiting enemies, marking the moment Upper and Lower Egypt joined into one kingdom. It is covered in early hieroglyphs and intimidating imagery. Historians treasure it as one of the earliest political documents ever made. King Narmer essentially announced his rule by chiseling himself looking absolutely terrifying for all eternity. 85. A single document signed by an English king over 800 years ago planted the seed for modern freedom and law. The Magna Carta was forced upon a furious King John in 1215 by rebellious barons fed up with his abuse of power. It established the radical idea that even a king must follow the law. He reportedly signed it through gritted teeth, then immediately tried to cancel it. The principles inside it later inspired democracies, constitutions, and rights around the entire world. 86. A Russian jeweler crafted dazzling jeweled eggs for the czars, each hiding a tiny luxurious surprise inside. The Fabergé imperial Easter eggs were given as gifts within the royal family, covered in gold, enamel, and precious gems. Open one and you might find a miniature golden carriage, a tiny portrait, or a jeweled mechanical bird. They represented unimaginable wealth right before the Russian Revolution swept it all away. Today, these glittering eggs remain some of the most extravagant trinkets ever created. 87. A Japanese artist created a single dramatic wave print that became one of the most recognized images on the entire planet. The Great Wave off Kanagawa shows a towering curling wave threatening tiny boats, with Mount Fuji peaking calmly in the distance. The artist Hokusai made it in the early 1800s as part of a series. The image has since appeared on everything from phone cases to emoji. That one furious blue wave conquered the world far more peacefully than any army ever could. 88. There is a museum holding the only soft tissue left of the dodo, the famously doomed bird humans wiped out with shocking speed. The Oxford dodo includes preserved skin and a head, the last genuine remains of a creature that vanished within decades of humans arriving on its island. The trusting, flightless bird had no fear of people and paid dearly for it. Scientists scan these precious remains hoping to learn more about the animal that became the ultimate symbol of extinction. 89. Ancient Assyrians carved gigantic winged bulls with human heads to stand guard at palace gates and intimidate every single visitor. The Lamassu are towering stone guardians with the body of a bull, the wings of an eagle, and the bearded face of a man. They were designed to protect kings and frighten enemies into total submission. Cleverly, they were carved with 5 legs so they looked correct from both the front and the side. Ancient propaganda truly did not mess around. 90. A French scientist hung a giant pendulum from a ceiling and used it to prove that the Earth actually spins beneath our feet. The Foucault pendulum slowly shifts its swinging direction throughout the day, not because the pendulum moves, but because the whole planet rotates underneath it. Crowds gathered in 1851, astonished to literally watch evidence of Earth turning. It was a brilliant and beautifully simple demonstration. The original device still swings today, calmly reminding everyone that we are all spinning constantly. 91. An ancient stone monument actually names a king mentioned in the Bible, giving historians a rare and thrilling connection. The Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III is a tall carved pillar from Assyria that records the king's military victories and the tribute he collected. One panel shows a kneeling figure believed to be the Israelite King Jehu, bowing in submission. It is one of the earliest images possibly depicting a biblical ruler. For scholars, finding a Bible name carved in stone was absolutely electric. 92. There is an elaborately decorated silver cauldron covered in mysterious gods, beasts, and ritual scenes that nobody fully understands. The Gundestrup cauldron was discovered dismantled in a Danish peat bog, its silver panels showing horned deities, strange animals, and what might be human sacrifice. Experts still debate who made it and what its haunting images mean. It was likely a sacred object deliberately taken apart and offered to the gods. Basically, it is an ancient mystery box that nobody has managed to fully solve. 93. There is half of a brilliant inventor's brain floating in a jar, belonging to the man who imagined computers long before they existed. Charles Babbage designed a mechanical calculating engine in the 1800s, dreaming up the basic concept of a programmable computer over a century early. After he died, his brain was split and preserved for study, with one half ending up in a London museum. People stare at the soggy gray matter that first conceived the machine now running your entire life. 94. A 15-ton iron meteorite that fell from space was once worshipped by native peoples who saw it as a sacred sky messenger. The Willamette meteorite is the largest ever found in America, a massive pitted chunk of metal that crashed long ago. Local tribes revered it deeply and performed ceremonies around it. It was later moved to a New York museum amid much controversy. Imagine a giant lump of space metal so impressive that entire cultures decided it deserved genuine prayers. 95. There is an ancient Roman cup that magically changes color, glowing green in normal light but blood red when lit from inside. The Lycurgus cup achieves this through microscopic particles of gold and silver embedded in the glass, a technique so advanced it baffles modern scientists. The Romans likely had no idea how they had accidentally invented nanotechnology. The cup depicts a mythological king being strangled by vines. Honestly, the Romans casually created glowing color-shifting glassware and then simply moved on. 96. A section of one of history's most infamous walls still stands in a museum, covered in defiant spray-painted graffiti. The Berlin Wall divided a city for decades, separating families and symbolizing the tense Cold War standoff between East and West. People risked their lives trying to cross it. When it finally fell in 1989, jubilant crowds chipped away pieces as souvenirs. Preserved chunks now sit in museums worldwide, transforming a brutal symbol of division into a triumphant reminder that walls eventually fall. 97. An entire room paneled in glowing amber once existed, then mysteriously vanished during a war and was painstakingly rebuilt from scratch. The original amber room was a breathtaking chamber covered in tons of carved amber, gold, and mirrors, gifted to Russian royalty. During World War II, the Nazis looted it, and it disappeared without a trace, sparking treasure hunts that continue today. Refusing to accept the loss, artisans spent decades recreating the dazzling room, so visitors can once again stand inside solid sunshine. 98. There is a giant squid preserved in an enormous glass tank, a creature so elusive it was once dismissed as a sailor's myth. Nicknamed Archie, this colossal squid stretches several meters long with massive eyes and long grasping tentacles lined with suckers. For centuries, people thought giant squids were exaggerated legends of sea monsters dragging ships under. Then, real specimens proved they genuinely exist in the deep ocean. Archie now floats serenely in London, the closest thing science has to a kraken. 99. There is a famous cracked bell that became a powerful symbol of freedom, despite being completely useless at ringing. The Liberty Bell developed a major crack early on, and attempts to fix it only made things worse, leaving it permanently silent. Yet over time, it transformed into a beloved emblem of American independence and the fight against slavery. Millions visit it in Philadelphia every year. It is genuinely poetic that a broken bell that cannot even ring became the loudest symbol of liberty. 100. A farmer plowing his field uncovered a mysterious carved bust of a woman so elegant she still puzzles experts today. The Lady of Elche is an ancient stone sculpture featuring an unknown woman wearing huge elaborate coiled headdresses on both sides of her face. Discovered in Spain, her exact origin and purpose remain debated. Some believe she was a goddess, others a noblewoman. Her serene, confident expression gives nothing away, leaving her one of the most stylish and secretive faces in all of archaeology. 101. There is a clever little machine that the Nazis trusted completely, never realizing brilliant codebreakers had secretly cracked it. The Enigma machine scrambled German military messages using rotating wheels, creating codes the enemy believed were utterly unbreakable. A determined team of Allied geniuses, including the famous Alan Turing, eventually outsmarted it, secretly reading enemy plans and helping win the war. The Germans kept using it, blissfully unaware. That typewriter-looking gadget hid one of the greatest secret victories in all of history. 102. An ancient Greek painting shows a man diving gracefully into the unknown, believed to represent the leap into the afterlife. The Tomb of the Diver fresco is incredibly rare because almost no Greek paintings from that era survived. It decorated the inside of a tomb, depicting a lone figure plunging from a tower into water. Experts think it symbolized the journey from life into death. It is strangely peaceful and beautiful, an ancient artist's calm and graceful idea of the final goodbye. 103. There are preserved specimens of a striped animal that humans hunted into total extinction and then immediately regretted losing. The thylacine, also called the Tasmanian tiger, was a dog-like marsupial with tiger stripes and a pouch. Settlers wrongly blamed it for killing livestock and wiped it out, with the last known one dying alone in a zoo in 1936. Museums now guard their few preserved specimens like treasure. People still report spotting the ghostly creature, desperately hoping it somehow survived after all. 104. Bronze Age people hammered an entire ceremonial cape out of a single sheet of solid gold, and it is genuinely jaw-dropping. The mold cape is a delicate gleaming shoulder garment found in Wales, so finely worked that it must have belonged to someone extremely important. It was discovered crushed inside an ancient grave and painstakingly reassembled. The cape is so tight and fragile that it could barely be worn at all. Basically, somebody thousands of years ago owned shockingly fancy golden fashion. 105. There is a coffin-shaped machine that once breathed for people whose own lungs had stopped working, and it kept them alive for years. The iron lung was a giant metal cylinder that encased polio patients, using air pressure to force their chests to rise and fall. Patients lay inside with only their heads sticking out, sometimes for decades. It saved countless lives during terrifying polio outbreaks. Seeing one today is a powerful reminder of how miraculous modern vaccines truly are. 106. There is a famously botched taxidermy lion that looks absolutely nothing like a real lion, and people adore it for being terrible. The Lion of Gripsholm was stuffed in the 1700s by someone who had clearly never seen an actual lion, working only from a vague description and a bare skeleton. The result has bulging, cartoonish eyes, a goofy grin, and a flat, confused face. It looks more like a startled Muppet than a fierce predator. Honestly, it became beloved purely for failing so spectacularly. 107. There are ancient sculptures pried from a famous Greek temple that two countries have been fiercely arguing over for 2 centuries. The Parthenon marbles are stunning carved figures removed from the Acropolis by a British lord in the early 1800s, who shipped them off to London. Greece has demanded their return for generations, insisting they belong on their original temple. Britain continues to keep them in a museum. It is the longest-running, most polite tug-of-war over rocks in human history. 108. The ancient Egyptians mummified millions of cats, breeding entire generations of kittens specifically to be sacrificed to the gods. These cat mummies were wrapped carefully and offered at temples dedicated to feline goddesses, especially the cat-headed deity Bastet. Cats were so sacred that harming one could be punished by death. Yet ironically, countless kittens were raised purely to become religious offerings. Today, these little wrapped bundles sit in museums, proof that Egypt's obsession with cats started thousands of years before the internet. 109. There is a pair of sparkling red shoes so beloved that they are protected like national treasure inside a major museum. Dorothy's ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz dazzled audiences in the classic 1939 film, glittering with thousands of tiny red sequins. One original pair was even famously stolen and recovered years later in a dramatic sting. The shoes now rest safely in the Smithsonian. Millions of visitors smile at them, fighting the powerful urge to click their heels 3 times. 110. One of the very first books ever printed with movable type still survives, and it completely transformed the world. The Gutenberg Bible was produced in the 1450s by Johannes Gutenberg, whose printing press suddenly allowed books to be made quickly instead of copied slowly by hand. Before this, books were rare and absurdly expensive. His invention spread knowledge like wildfire across the globe. Holding one of these surviving Bibles means holding the spark that ignited the modern age of information itself. 111. A fish thought to have gone extinct 65 million years ago was casually pulled from the ocean, alive in 1938, stunning the entire scientific world. The coelacanth was known only from ancient fossils until a curious museum worker spotted a strange blue fish among a fisherman's catch off South Africa. Experts could hardly believe a living dinosaur-era fish still swam the deep seas. It became the ultimate living fossil. Sometimes nature simply refuses to follow the rules we confidently wrote. And that is all 111 horrifying things hidden inside museums, from soap corpses to frozen children, to a fish that forgot it was supposed to be extinct. History is genuinely the weirdest, dumbest, most disturbing horror show ever written, and we are only scratching the surface. So, if your brain feels delightfully broken right now, smash that like button, subscribe to Dumb History for more chaos, and drop a comment telling me which one creeped you out the most. Was it the soap lady, the bone chapel, or the general who visited his own leg? Tell me below. I read every single one. Now go look at a museum a little differently, and I will see you in the next one.